This is episode 100 of the Why Not Me podcast. What is needed? I'm your host, Anita Bremer. In this podcast, I help spiritual moms heal to feel whole and be successful. Because when you heal yourself, you heal generations. All right, we made it, episode 100, and I'm ready to pick a winner. But first, you know that I wasn't going to just pick a winner right away, right? I'm going to give you a quick little episode here, a little sharing, teaching tool, whatever you want to call it, something that I hope will bring value to your life. And then we're going to make actually a few announcements. There are a few fun announcements I have along with announcing the winner. So I hope this will be a brief episode, but that's how it's going to go. So, first of all, I really just wanted to offer you a few reflections on 100 episodes. I know for me, when I would listen to other people's podcasts, I had all these questions about the actual podcasting, the behind the scenes, what are you learning, that kind of thing. And so, just for a minute or two here, I want to share a few of those learnings with you. The first one is that I didn't go back and check, but I think it's been roughly 3 months that I've been announcing this giveaway and encouraging you all to send in your reviews and your ratings and share the podcast with those you know. And I think before I started that, I had about 5 reviews. I don't remember how many ratings I had, probably also about 5 ratings. And now I have 10 reviews. I think there might be 1 or 2 more trickling in. I did a little bit of research because a couple of the people who filled out the Google form, their review wasn't showing up for me. And it apparently takes like 5 business days sometimes. And I have 14 ratings. Now, I could think of that as like a giant failure. Like I was kind of hoping, dozens, if not like 100 people reviewing and rating. But I don't feel bad about it at all. Like it was just something that I was trying, something I was experimenting with. And I really feel like this is all working for me. And I don't maybe know how yet, but it is. Right. So that was one of the more recent learnings. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I totally 100% wish I would have started podcasting sooner. I started listening to podcasts before podcasts were really popular. I think it was around 2012 or 2013. And there weren't very many podcasts out there. And at that time, I kind of had this um, inkling that I would someday have my own podcast. I just fell in love with the medium and I knew that it would come very easily to me. You know me, I always have lots of words. And this last couple of years of podcasting, the last 100 episodes, there's actually more than 100 episodes, but there are several that are like bonus episodes that I didn't number. I have learned so much. So, this is sort of another learning, another reflection is that I've learned a ton specifically about my voice and getting to know myself. And I wish that I would have started podcasting sooner so that I could have learned all of that sooner. But back to reflection number 1, it's all working for me in exactly the timing that it's supposed to be. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that through 100 episodes of podcasting, I for sure have become a different person. I am far more confident in my own opinions, my own thoughts, how I speak about them. And recently, I published an episode about spiritual lessons from the Lion King. And that came from a talk I gave in sacrament meeting. And I hadn't given a talk for a few years. And it was so striking to me how much different giving that talk, the experience of giving that talk was versus times that I've given talks in sacrament meeting before. First of all, the flow of what I want to say, how I want to say it was way easier. Usually I spend hours upon hours upon hours, preparing for my talk and researching quotes and this and that, getting in my head about, what do people need and what do they want? And I did none of that. I was just like, okay, I've got this topic assigned. I spent a few days thinking about my way of approaching it and what I wanted to say. And then when I sat down to write it, it just flowed so easily. And I think that's because of my practice of sitting down to write a podcast every week, right? And I don't always necessarily write them all out. Sometimes I write them more than other times. But the main takeaway is that I really have become a different person, which is so beautiful and amazing. Okay. So, since the reflections are done, I wanted to read to you a snippet from a book that I read and fell in love with. And because of my affiliation with another group, a group of coaches, we had the author come and talk to us about the book. And so I've talked to the author a little bit, asked a question. The book is called Original Grace. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding up the cover here. Um, and it is specifically for Latter day Saints. The author is Adam Miller. He is a Latter day Saint philosopher. He does a lot of thinking and theorizing and philosophizing about gospel topics. He said his life's work is about grace and that this book, it's really quite short. It's only 115 pages, but it's pretty thick. It's like scriptures in the way that every sentence almost can make you pause and think, like, what is he saying? And what does that mean for me? And I just loved his book so much. I also feel like one of my life's learnings, something that I'm really interested in learning more about is grace. My favorite, all-time favorite general conference talk is about grace. So I just really, really loved the book and I loved the main message. So I want to read you, it's about a page long. It's not too long. A snippet from this book. And we're going to start with this. Does suffering in general have a purpose? No. Suffering is just a fact of life, but suffering can, by way of grace, be given a purpose. In addition to being relieved, it can be redeemed. It can teach and strengthen and empower. It can, in God's hands, be repurposed for growth and progress. According to the logic of original sin, the purpose of the law is punishment. The law's purpose is to judge what is deserved. The law is a divine mechanism for judging who deserves to suffer or not, and to what degree. The point of the law is accusation. The logic of grace, on the other hand, takes the purpose of the law to be love. The law's purpose is still to judge, but now to judge what is needed. The law is a divine mechanism for judging what is needed to relieve suffering and liberate sinners. The point of the law is grace. The contrast between these two logics is sharp. Where sin reasons backward about whether someone's suffering is deserved, grace reasons forward about how best to respond to that suffering. Where sin understands God's law as a tool of condemnation, grace understands God's law as a discipline of compassion. Where sin uses the law to obligate suffering, grace uses the law to command succor. Sin begins from the original assumption of guilt and concludes that suffering is deserved. Grace begins from the original reality of suffering and concludes that redemption is needed. Sin uses God's law to ask what is deserved. Grace uses God's law to ask what is needed. Okay, close quote. I just love that so much. And it's kind of the crux of the book. So this is on page 30. So he has already discussed kind of suffering and original sin and these ideas. And so I just love the idea that sin looks backwards. What did you do? How did you do it? What was your intention? All of that. And grace looks forward, right? How can we go forward from here being our best selves? I just love it so much. So that is sort of what I wanted to share as the uplifting message from today. I think we can apply it in a lot of different ways. We can apply it, especially in our relationships, right? With our parenting or our marriage, or even with our relationships with ourselves. Instead of asking, what do I deserve? Or what does my child deserve? Or what does my spouse deserve? Or my ex spouse? Or whatever relationship it is. What if we started getting in the habit of asking ourselves, what is needed here? Many of my clients struggle with shame and guilt and feeling like they're not enough in the world. And I think perhaps we could look at it. This idea that Adam Miller puts forth is because we're looking at ourselves with the assumption that we're broken, right? The sin assumption, instead of the grace assumption, which is that, of course, we're going to suffer. Of course, it's going to be hard. What is needed? What is needed for us to become who we're supposed to become, to thrive, to love, to learn, all of that, right? Another reason why I loved this book so much is because of what I'm learning in the trauma certification that I'm taking right now. When we look at the nervous system and trauma, right, which is, I define trauma as any emotion that it has not been resolved and so therefore lives in our body and continues to affect us. When we look at that, one of the overarching questions we're asking is, what support is needed? The idea here is that our bodies, our nervous systems know what it needs. And when we're given the correct support, we will naturally heal and grow. It's kind of like the idea of plants, right? I'm just like stuck on this gardening analogy. When we take care of a plant, like say you have a plant that requires full sunlight to thrive, but you plant it in a really shady area. You wouldn't go to that plant and be like, plant, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you growing? Why aren't you producing fruit? You would say, what is needed? Like, what do I need to change to get this plant to grow? Maybe I need to move it to a sunnier location. Maybe it needs more water. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there are animals that are eating its leaves or something, right? The idea with plants is that when they're in the proper environment and they get the proper nourishment, the proper sun and water and fertilizer and all of that, they will grow and thrive, right? That's just how plants are. They will for sure grow when they're in the proper environment. The same is true for humans, right? When we're in the proper environment, when we have the correct support that we need, and some of us need more support than others, right? We all come with different personalities and different needs, right? Then we will naturally learn and grow. And so, having learned that in my trauma class, and then reading this and thinking about it from a spiritual perspective, I was just like, oh my gosh, yes, it's like a truth, a divine truth that when we have the proper support, we learn, we grow, we thrive. Right? Don't you just love that? I just love that idea so much. So I met with a peer coach that's also going through this trauma certification. And I don't even remember, this was only 2 days ago, but I don't even remember what I originally, like how I originally described the coaching that I wanted. But I do remember, and I think this will stick with me for a long time, kind of what I learned, right? Which is, I learned that what I really want in my business and for this podcast and for, I don't know, any interaction that I have with people is that I want to be my full self and to be able to pull on a variety of tools and learnings to be able to help if people want my help. I totally recognize that not everybody wants my help. But assuming we're talking about my business or like this podcast, assuming you're listening in, then that you're kind of opting in to wanting some help. Um, and what I was doing before was sort of compartmentalizing, like, oh, I learned this from being a mom. And I learned this from my psychology degree in college. And I learned this from going through the life coach school. And I learned that from my trauma certification. And I was sort of keeping them in their boxes. Like if somebody came to me for life coaching, then I would only use the tools I learned through the life coach school. And if like a friend was talking to me about parenting, then I would just, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily always true, but generally speaking, I would just talk about like, well, my experiences being a mom. And what I heard myself say is like, I just want to be able to be me and to rely on any tools I've learned in my whole life to be able to help the people that I'm around. Right. And the coach asked me throughout the course of the conversation, what is your place? Because a little bit later, I'll talk more about this. I have this thought that like, it's not my place to coach in this area. And that really made me pause. What is my place? And because of my patriarchal blessing, because of some things I've learned from my human design, which I haven't talked about human design on the podcast yet, but I hope to in the future, I think my place is simply love. And that just feels so true to me. It resonates in my heart that whether or not I'm naturally good at it, I kind of don't think I'm naturally good at love. I'm learning how to love. I'm learning how to be unconditionally loving. I'm learning how to hold space when I don't fully love. My place is love and to be kind of a vessel of love. And I want to be able to do that and be my full self and bring any tools, any teachings that I have access to that might help someone and to not judge myself because sometimes I'm on a coaching call and I'm thinking like, okay, well, I should use these tools that I learned from the life coach school. And what really comes into my mind is a verse of scripture. And I'll share it. But then afterwards, sometimes I'm like, oh, was that weird that you brought out scriptures or that you said that thing, right? That didn't really quite feel like it fit. But when I ask myself this question, what is needed? I feel like everything comes together in more love is needed. And we need to be more of ourselves. We need to give ourselves permission to be more of ourselves. And we need to learn the skills to be more of ourselves. That's what I really think of when I think what is needed. What is needed for me is for me to be more fully myself and to bring my whole self to everywhere I am. What is needed for my clients? I think a bit of an education on our nervous systems and how our nervous systems work. Some of them need a safe place to talk about their faith struggles, right? I could go on, but for every single one of them, love and acceptance is needed. Okay, so this brings me to my first announcement, which is that I am entering a new iteration of the podcast. So it'll still be here exactly where it is in your feed. But if you've been with me since my podcast was called the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, you know that this is kind of what is needed for me, that I just iterate, that I learn and grow and I adjust as needed. I used to have a lot of shame around that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I keep renaming my podcast. I am not sticking to like one thing and people are going to get confused, all of that. But now I kind of see it as just an evolution and a beautiful evolution. And I hope that when you see that, that it gives yourself permission to evolve as well, to change, to make new decisions, to, shift old decisions, whatever that is. So the podcast, hopefully as of next week, will be called Trauma Healing for Latter-day Saints. We're going to talk about trauma, but we're also going to talk about this faith and spiritual aspect because the truth is that's who I am and I can't not do it. And I think those are my people. My people want to heal, but they are spiritual or faithful people who also like those discussions. So there will be discussions about trauma and healing from the nervous system point of view. And there will be discussions about faith and spirituality and holding space for hard things. So, who is this going to be for? And I just think it's so useful because I never did this for my podcast when I started it as the Shame Proof Your Life podcast. I didn't even do it when I switched to the Why Not Me podcast. So, this is who I'm thinking of. This podcast will be for Latter-day Saint women, specifically Latter-day Saint women with depression or chronic stress and or toxic shame. So you don't have to have all of those. You can just have one of those. Let me just explain what that means. Women who tend to stay small and quiet, who don't speak up, who don't feel confident, who doubt themselves, who look to others for validation because they were taught that the answers were outside of them. Women who want to be themselves but don't know how. They want to feel peaceful, but inside they feel chaotic. They feel torn, maybe. And this is generally for women whose default response is that dorsal response. If you already know anything about the nervous system, it's the response to separate or shut down, right? That's essentially what depression is. And I just want to add that I'm really speaking to the woman who can see generational patterns. Maybe you see things in your parents or your grandparents, and you want to stop the generational pattern, the negative, maladaptive patterns. You don't only want to heal for yourself, but for your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren and so on. It's likely that the person who will really enjoy this podcast has some trauma or abuse in their past, probably mostly from their upbringing, from childhood through young adulthood. Maybe a parent or other adult in power in your life made you feel like you couldn't be yourself, made you feel like you had to do the right thing, that you couldn't make a mistake, that you couldn't speak up, you couldn't shake the boat kind of thing, rock the boat. Or maybe you had a parent or a caregiver or your environment in your home was chaotic, or another person, another parent or caregiver who maybe was angry, that end of things. I want, just like in that quote, that passage from Original Grace, the book that I read, I want to help you turn your suffering into love. So this is mostly for people who want help in their relationships with, likely with your children or your spouse. Could be other relationships too, but, the Latter-day Saint woman is all about how do I be a better wife and mom and disciple of Christ. So we want to take these hard things that have happened in your life that have kept you small and quiet and not confident and turn them into beautiful learnings and love. Who is this not for? It's not for you if, generally speaking, you already feel connected, creative, calm, right? You don't really struggle with anxiety or depression or shame. You can go with the flow, you can roll with the punches. Life is pretty good. That's probably not who this podcast is for. Or it's not for people who really don't like to hear about like scripture takeaways or gospel ideas. There will probably still be a lot of that infused in the podcast. The results that I'm really focusing on is, first of all, confidence. Confidence to be honest with yourself and others, to speak up, to make changes you've been thinking about making for a long time, but either haven't pulled the trigger or haven't figured out how to do it. And secondly, to create more of what you want and less of what you don't want. Higher quality relationships and time. That's really what I'm focused on, higher quality relationships and time. And the way we do that is by becoming more of yourself, right? Peeling away the layers of socialization, identifying what's happening in your body that's holding you back, right? And there will still be some mindset work as well. Okay, questions. If you're a guy, you are still absolutely welcome to listen. I'm just going to talk to the woman because that's who I am and that's who I'm thinking of when I'm thinking about that person that I really want to help. If you are not LDS, you may or may not still like the podcast. And if you've been listening for a while and you're not LDS, then you probably have a sense of who I am. You'll probably like it. Um, if you're spiritual or have some kind of faith tradition, you'll probably enjoy it just fine and just pick and choose what's right for you. If not, if you're not spiritual, if you don't have a faith tradition, then you might find that it's not really the right flavor for you. And then last question, Danita, are you qualified to do trauma work? This is always the question I ask myself. So I'm guessing that you're asking it too. And the answer might be no. Honestly, maybe I'm not qualified, but I have had some very specific spiritual promptings that are leading me in this direction. And I've decided that even if I'm not qualified, even if I, God forbid, harm someone, would be my biggest nightmare, I can't deny the promptings that I've had. And I would feel worse to not move forward in this direction, ignoring those promptings, than I would moving forward with any kind of harm that might happen. And in a recent fireside, I went to a psychologist came. I don't know what exactly, if he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist or what he calls himself. He said that there will never be enough professionals in the world to address all of the depression. And so we each need to be our own, listening ear and compassionate witness for one another. So that's the work I'm doing. All right. That's kind of big announcement. Next announcement. I am going to start doing drop-in coaching. And this is going to be free or very inexpensive. It's going to be by donation. So you can choose to donate or not. And you don't have to sign up ahead of time. You just come if you want and then donate if you want. And the links, I'll just drop those in the Zoom chat. We're going to start October 26th and November 2nd. Those are both Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. So noon Mountain Time. There will be no open coaching the week of November 7th or the week of Thanksgiving. So it'll be kind of a little bit confusing. So you're really going to want to be on my email list. And so I will drop the link to my email list in the description of this podcast, because that's going to be the easiest way to find the Zoom information and to know when it's happening and when it's not, and what days and times and all of that. Okay, here is the most exciting moment, which is let's announce the winner. So I am just going to share my screen. Oh, over here. No. See if I can do this. Nope, that's not what I wanted to share. I'll have to do some editing. Hold on, this will make it easier for me to see which screen to share. Here we go. I have all of the names in an online random picker, and I have shuffled them. I put them in order of when people entered the giveaway, and I've shuffled them 10 times. And now I'm going to spin the wheel and see who wins. Mrs. 3 is the winner of the 100th podcast episode giveaway. So thank you so much, Mrs. 3. I will be in contact with you to get you your pair of Apple AirPods. And if somebody referred you to the podcast, I will be in contact with them as well. Okay, that's enough for now. And so are you. If this episode made you think about yourself or others in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review or share it with a friend? I have 3 openings for private coaching right now. If one of them is for you, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.